The SNP's got a new secret strategy, and it is to be boring. Remember the Nicola Sturgeon years? She was always up for a fight, wasn't she? Named person scheme, gender recognition reform, conversion therapy ban, hate speech legislation, anything. She'd just bring it on, relish the controversy, fight and win. It gets passed in any case, and that was the strategy. I mean, there was only one case, I think, in her era when they seemed to back down, and that was their absolutely bonkers redefinition of child abuse. That was proposed, then it sort of seemed to disappear into the long grass. But the general picture with Nicola Sturgeon was fight, fight, fight. We don't care, it's controversial. People can kick up a fuss. They're wrong, we're right, we're doing it in any case. Humza Yousaf, the continuity candidate, certainly did continue that, exactly the same approach. But things have now changed in the SNP. We've now got John Swinney and maybe Kate Forbes in the background as well influencing this. And their new strategy instead, in contrast, seems to be a bit bland and boring. A few examples to back this up. Let's look at the conversion therapy ban. Nicola Sturgeon was saying, we're going to do this, it's the right thing, it's vital for Scotland, we're going to be a progressive nation leading the world. Whereas the SNP are now saying, well, let's just let Labour do it. And we'll have a look how they do with it. Now, to be fair, in Nicola Sturgeon's day, it was a Conservative government at Westminster, and it wasn't clear whether they're going to include transgender or not in it. And maybe the Westminster one, the Conservative one, might have been a bit watered down in some ways. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. They kept chopping and changing, being the Conservatives. But now the SNP seem to say, okay, Labour, they'll probably do it properly. But I also think what they're thinking is, let's let Labour do it, and let's let them take the flak. Because if in Scotland they tried to introduce a conversion therapy ban that included gender, there would be massive controversy. All the feminist groups, all the people that were opposing the gender recognition reform, they would swing into action again and be on the warpath over the conversion therapy ban. I think the SNP is scared of that. They don't want that. So as far as they're concerned, let Labour go and fight the battle. Let Labour take the flak. Then the SNP can maybe come along behind and say, okay, yeah, that's sort of okay, or we'll accept that. Quite a change in strategy. Now, of course, as the family party, we'll be saying the whole conversion therapy ban idea is just completely wrong. But the only controversy the SNP will be worried about is the transgender bit. But as I say, if Labour can take the flak, that suits the SNP just fine. Assisted suicide. Now, the assisted suicide bill in the Scottish Parliament is not an SNP government bill. The SNP has spoken positively about making space to debate it. So they've been sort of pretty open about it, or towards it, in their manifestos. But now, recently, an SNP spokesman said, they're not certain that the bill in the Parliament's compatible with the devolution settlement. I mean, people already knew that. It's going to need tweaking. There's going to be some cooperation from the UK government. But suddenly it's as though the SNP is saying, we're not so sure about this in Scotland. Let's leave it to Labour. Because again, it just seems like Labour is on the front foot and assisted suicide is going to come forward pretty quickly in the UK Parliament and might pass within a short number of months. And it might be here. So all those people who might have thought, I'll just vote Labour to get the SNP out. Well, you reap what you sow. And let's just see how Labour are acting now they're in government. But again, I think we see the same thing, just a hint of it from the SNP. This is going to be really controversial. If Labour are going to do it in any case, down at Westminster, let's let them do it, or at least let them do it first. That'll take the sting out of it. We can avoid a confrontation, avoid a controversy in Scotland. Another issue, decriminalisation of abortion. The SNP has been talking about and sort of half promising and encouraging whatever, full decriminalisation of abortion. In other words, abolishing all the time limits. It's basically what they would like to do. But again, they seem to be dragging their heels on it. They seem to be going a bit slowly. And I would imagine maybe they're thinking, Labour's probably going to do this first. In the UK, let's let them do it first. And then if we do it later, well, at least, we won't seem that extreme. We'll just seem like we're, staying on the right side of history by doing the same thing as Labour. I mean, the next illustration is a minor issue, but I just see the same thinking coming through. A committee was appointed to produce recommendations about school uniform in Scotland, and their recommendations were pretty extreme. I mean, it wasn't far off effectively abolishing school uniform. But in the past, in Nicola Sturgeon's day, that would have just been taken on board. Let's do it. Let's have the fight. We'll win. It's fine. But now, the SNP have actually only sort of enacted half of it. They've watered it down a little bit, as though they're not quite up for the fight over it. We're looking at another area to do with education, a bit more of a serious area here. This is the assessment system, the exam system. Now, there's a huge body of opinion within the Scottish educational establishment that says scrap exams. Exams are some sort of capitalist oppressive scheme to keep people down or whatever. I mean, who knows? But they don't like the idea of exams. And their ideal would be teachers make up the grades for the pupils. That way you could close the attainment gap. So the teachers say, oh, my class is really nice. I'm going to give them all grade B. And then, oh, well, some of them are really poor. This is a really poor area. Let's call that an A after all. Oh, but some of them are white, so maybe we'll call that B. That's the sort of thinking that the Scottish educational establishment would like to see in terms of assessment. So this proposal was really pushing down in that direction. Let's do away with exams. But again, the Scottish government watered it down very significantly. They're still heading in the wrong direction, but they're heading in the wrong direction in quite a cautious way, tiptoeing in the wrong direction, rather than leaps and bounds as in the Sturgeon era. Let's look at the Gaza issue. Again, if we go back to Humza Yousaf, he was just unrestrained, mouthing off the most extreme comments at every opportunity. Now again, I still think the SNP has got a serious anti-Semitism problem. But if you look at the leadership, the official pronouncements of the SNP, they've sort of toned it down a little bit. It's not as strident as it might be. Here might be a test of my theory. Let's think about John Mason. If my theory is right, that the SNP is in, let's not rock the boat, let's avoid controversy, let's just jog along quietly, then what will they do about John Mason? They will let him back in. He's currently suspended. They will let him back in. Now, Jonathan Mason's got to go through two committees to get readmitted as an SNP MSP. The first thing is to get readmitted to the party. The next thing is to get readmitted as an MSP. Now, I always imagine these parties that it's very centralised, and John Swinney will be saying, right, what do we want to do? Do we want to let John Mason back? No, I'll decide. But apparently these things are more devolved, and it's more, this committee will be formed somehow under the Constitution, and it will be up to those people to make a decision. Well, maybe it is decentralised to some degree. I find it hard to imagine that the top brass of the party won't be communicating with them in some way. But let's see, I think if John Mason is let back into the SNP, that will be further evidence of their strategy of trying to be bland and boring and uncontroversial and just go along without any fuss. Which they're able to do more, of course, because they're free from the Greens. The Greens were always pushing the SNP towards extreme policies. Nicola Sturgeon was more than happy to go with them. Seems at the moment they want to tone it down a bit. And the party is also free from Humza Yousaf as well, I say, who would be very, very intemperate. I would say to the Conservatives and Labour in the Scottish Parliament, one of their greatest blunders in the last year or so was to get Humza Yousaf to step down. Remember, they had votes of no confidence and they really attacked him, really went for him to try and knock him off his perch, and they succeeded. Worst move ever by them. They should have left him in place and they would be in a much stronger position now. But yeah, they took out their greatest asset in the SNP. So what are the SNP doing instead? They're trying to keep a low profile, they're trying to be uncontroversial. Then their favourite thing is, to get a hard hat on and to go and have your photograph taken out in some business or something out in the community. Okay, the SNP's policies in general are harmful to business, but the general public probably doesn't appreciate that to a great extent. If they're there in a factory with a hard hat on, then their focus is on the economy and just everyday running the government type things. So that's what they're trying to do, to give the impression they're just trying to focus on the basics. They're trying to give the impression they're competent with the basics. I think in a lot of ways they're not, but they're trying to give that impression. And the focus is not so much on, here's our radical policies in this area. It's just, we're sort of doing the job and we're trying to run these things reasonably well, which for the public, I think, probably goes over reasonably well. Because things like the economy, the NHS, what policies do the wider public really understand very well? I mean, for myself, like, how do you improve the NHS? How do government policies influence the economy? These are very complicated questions. They're very difficult questions. Often they're questions that actually no one's quite sure what the answer is. But if you can just be seen as focusing on these things, I think that plays quite well. The other thing I think the SNP is refraining from as well is being really vicious, if you like, in their attacks on Labour and the Conservatives, etc. I think they're trying to tone that down. They're trying to cool everything down. The idea being, if they're not too aggressive towards their opponents, then their opponents might feel they can't be too aggressive towards them, and just the whole of politics cools down, and that's what the SNP want. Right, will it work? Will it work? Well, I think whether it's the best strategy or not, I think for John Swinney, it's basically the only strategy available to him. It's the only card in his hand that he's got to play. I mean, that's who he is. This is what the star's going to be. I think for Kate Forbes, I think she'll be quite keen on it, maybe because she thinks it's the best strategy. But also, some of these issues, she'd be quite happy to sidestep them and to not have the SNP in the heart of controversy around them. So she's probably quite keen on this strategy as well. So will it work? Looking at what's happening UK-wide and in Scotland, where Labour are, well, I mean, their first few months in government have been absolutely disastrous. The SNP's got a core independence vote who don't treat independence so much as a political issue. It's more important than that, and they're never going to leave the SNP, so that vote's quite secure. So to expand from that, is this strategy the best option? Is it the most effective? Is it the best way of staving off Labour in marginal seats in Scotland? I'm not sure, but I tend to think maybe it is. The idea that you're just going to keep a reasonably low profile and wait for the others to go wrong. Well, Labour seem to be obliging, the Conservatives seem to be obliging, so maybe it is the best strategy. Right, from my point of view, what do I think when I look at this strategy? I think the really important thing I'd want to say to people is the SNP is trying to keep a low profile, be a bit uncontroversial, be a bit bland now. But we've got to remember this is absolutely crucial. You've got to remember what they are doing on an ongoing basis. I mean, one of my frustrations in politics is what I call currency bias. Whatever the latest issue is, gets all the attention, it's getting the news coverage, YouTube's full of videos about it, people are talking about it, the focus is on it, it's the hot topic. But then a few weeks later, people are bored of that and they're on to something else. I mean, fair enough, that's the news. People are interested in the new things. People get bored of hearing about things they've heard about lots and lots of times before. But when we're talking about what a government's doing, it's really important to look at what they're doing on an ongoing basis. So, for example, the corruption of children in schools, extremely serious issue, and it is ongoing. While the Scottish Government was in the process of introducing the appalling, corrupting, trivialising, vulgar sex education resources, that was a real hot topic in Scotland. We made it a hot topic. There was a lot of concern, there was a lot of attention on it. But now that attention generally has dissipated, which is a real shame. It's very unfortunate, because this is the phase where the damage has been done. This is the phase where these resources are being used, probably in a majority of schools across Scotland. Yet in general, public interest attention has moved away from it. If you look at confusing kids with transgender ideology, still taking place in schools, just as it ever was. Abortion, killing the unborn, still going on at ever increasing rates every year, but it's not the current news story. So the temptation is, I think it is a temptation, for people to just look at the latest thing rather than looking at what a government is doing on an ongoing basis. So I think with the assisted suicide issue and the conversion therapy, particularly the conversion therapy ban as well, okay, the SNP won't be labelled as the party that brought this in, but it will come in absolutely with their approval. So morally, I think they're equally culpable. So I think at the moment the SNP are doing their best to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, but they're not going to fool us. What they've come up with is a new strategy. They have not reformed their core moral values. Okay, I hope that was interesting. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Do like the video as well. Comment below. That all helps more people to see it. And get your tickets for our conference. Link below. Thanks for watching.